You know, now that I come to think of it, I'm not sure if I...
Well, this is kind of unexpected. Yeah. Oh, Lawrence, he's a great kidder, you know. And he didn't tell me we were coming for any kind of an interview.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
I hope it's all right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you some questions about when you were growing up here in Astoria.
You go right ahead and ask all the questions you want. I may have an answer and I may not.
Oh. You know, I thought I had met you before, but apparently maybe I hadn't. Did you come here before with your son?
Lawrence is my son.
Right.
And he was born in 1940.
In 1940?
1940, so he's pretty old. He's 69 this year.
Well, me too. I'll be 69.
You're same age.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll be 69 November 17th.
He was a Valentine baby.
Oh, was he?
February 14th.
Oh, okay, so he's older than me. Or, no, he's younger than I.
He's older than you.
He's older than me, because he's already 69?
He was 69 last February.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I realize I'm 3 times as old as the girl who was working upstairs in the archives. I mean, in our other room up there.
I'm about 26 years older than you.
Oh.
I think I was 26 when he was born.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I would have been 27 that year in October. No, my birthday was in October.
So you had lived in, was it Mount Solo or somewhere in that area?
No, we lived in Astoria all my life except for about 2 years.
Oh,
When I was about 2.5 years old, I think 1916, Dad moved to the Mount Solo area. He had some acreage. He bought a farm over there, and tried to get into some crops and stuff. Had 2 years of crop failures and indebtedness for flood control dikes and stuff. And he had to come back to Astoria and go back to work on his day job, which was a Finnish mercantile company at that time. So we came back to Astoria in I guess it was 17 or 18, and lived here until I got married and went away to go to school. So I really was in that full-time Astorian from my birth until 1930, January 1936, when I left here to go down to California to get some education at the University of Berkeley. So.
Yeah. When you lived here as a child in Astoria, who were your friends? I mean, did you play with?
Well, I lived in Uniontown, and most of my friends were all from Uniontown, and most of them from up in Churchill in Uniontown. You know why it's Churchill. Our house was right next door to the church, big church, evangelical Lutheran church. And actually, before my dad had the house moved away from the church, I could reach out of the kitchen window, practically touch the church. It was that close, really a fire hazard.
So was that the Congregational Church?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Reverend Colvin was the church there, as I remember. There was somebody there, and they had a parsonage on the other side of the church. And Bruno Colvin was my best friend, as the Reverend Colvin's son, exactly my age. And he and I were best friends all through the time until we graduated from high school. And he went into the Navy, and I got married and had to go to work and try to get some education, you know. So
I talked to his son, and his son had told me that his father had torn down the church. Was it the church? No, the school.
The school.
The school.
Reverend Colvin, he took the contract for tearing down the Taylor School and barged the lumber. Well, he told you that probably. Barged the lumber across the river, across out of the bar, up in Washington and to then back to Nacelle area, where he built a house for himself, and another church was built out of lumber from that old Taylor School. No, that was built in 1902. Yeah, that's no school. They were making at that time, trying to get a bond issue and stuff to build new schools, and us kids got recruited to draw posters and everything of Taylor School sliding down the hill. They claimed that the ground wasn't stable, that it was built on, and it had been there for 25 years or so. It wasn't really that old at that time.
And Mrs. Baylor, is it Baylor or Byler, the superintendent?
Byler.
Byler.
Yes, Cecilia Byler.
Cecilia Byler.
She was a principal. She was a good one. It's no nonsense. But she was a real good educator. And this was a good part of her career was in Astoria. And she writes about it. And
we have a copy of her book here.
Yeah. She was very good. I remember how Bruno and I got recruited into the debate team. The school board decided to have extracurricular activity of debate in addition to others in my 7th grade year, just after I got through Taylor School. Well, before we left Taylor School, they were making preparations for that. And Miss Byler called Bruno and I into her office and told us, well, we're going to be on the debate team. And I didn't like that one bit. And Bruno wasn't particularly anxious, although his father was a preacher, speaker and everything. And I put up all kinds of protests and everything. And I told my father is not a good speaker. Nobody in our family is good speakers. And there's no reason why I would make a good debater. And I'm sure my mother wouldn't even put up with it. She came to see my mother. Mother thought it was a great idea. I lost that debate.
Do you think it helped you, though, in your future?
Well, I think so. I went on and debated in high school, too, in my junior and senior years. I was on the debate team at Astoria High School. And I think, who knows, but subconsciously, and a lot of my work later on required that I talk to people, and have meetings and give talks, and it was a requirement of my work and traveling overseas and everything. So I think that background didn't hurt at least.
So were you bashful, though, when you first started?
Scared to death. Scared to death. Oh, I was scared. Oh my God. You try to act nonchalant and everything. Some of our opponents, I remember debaters from Corvallis, 2 girls debated. They came on, they were chewing gum like everything and having a big time. I couldn't imagine that kind of behavior. From our teacher, our debate coach in high school was Miss Brandstatter. That was a daughter of the principal.
Oh.
Yeah, Brandstatter. What's his first name? I don't remember. Hilda Brandstatter was a teacher there, and she was the debate coach, and she was a good one. And she really was a good one. And our debate teams did well. We always won our district championship, usually by unanimous scores. And so we were having no trouble when we got into the statewide semifinals and quarterfinals.
What kinds of things did you debate?
Oh, there were things about laws that were being proposed in the legislature regarding taxes and all kinds of really boring stuff. Yeah, they were so boring, and we had to do the research on them, and Miss Byler did a big share of the writing was done by our coach. Maybe I drank about that, of the main speeches. But we had to do pretty much research to be ready for questions, you know, and the rebuttals and all that stuff that takes place in debate, you know.
It's a very formal process.
It's a formal process.
Yeah. But you have to really keep your wits about you.
Well, you can't fall asleep, that's one thing.
Uh-huh.
And we had 3x5 cards, you know, we had all kinds of stuff on 3x5 cards. Something came up with, fiddle through the cards, see if we had anything on that, you know. Just a reminder.
Did you have an audience?
Well, people came, audiences were never very big for debates. But, oh yes, there was an audience. Yeah. One debate we had in Portland, I think I've got that written down, which high school had won that district. And we had a pass, and I think this was in the quarterfinals or semifinals for the state. And we debated in Portland. And they had a pretty good audience there. And it was a good debate. It was a good debate. I think it was in February, after our regular debate season here. The final day was about a week or two later. And Esther Reed, that name rings a bell to you or not?
No.
She was my debate partner on that debate. And we had the affirmative side on it. And the debate went quite well. And they were good debaters, and they had won all their debates so far. And I thought we did, you know, well too. And then we waited for the judges to, and the judges took a long time, 3 judges. And finally the first vote came in affirmative. That was for us. I said, well, that sounds good. Next 2 votes negative. We lost that debate. And our debate, we had gone to Portland, and she drove us up in her new car. She had a new Chevrolet. And we were just the 3 of us. Went from the school. And she was upset. She thought we had one hands down. I thought it was very close myself. And I wasn't, you know, upset by losing the debate. They were good debaters. And I was sincere when I congratulated them and wished them well in their next debates with into the finals, I think. But my debate partner was upset, Esther. And we got back to Astoria and then drive that night back to the debate was over about 8:30 or something like that. We weren't staying overnight. And we got to the car in the parking lot, and Esther Reed and I got to the back, and Miss Grant sat sat alone in the front of the seat. Without a word, we started off. Mister started crying. She started crying. I tried to comfort her. I put my arm around her, you know, tried to comfort her. That said, we did as well as we could. You had nothing to cry about, you know. But she cried. And if I kind of eased up on her, she'd start crying some more. So I would kind of hug her and try to... Well, that went on until we got about to rain, almost to Rainier on the old highway. And Miss Branson had thought she had enough of that. So she said, pull the car over. She said, Eddie, you drive all the rest of the way into Astoria. I'll take care of Esther. that was a weekend.
Did she stop crying?
Yeah. And when Esther got home, she couldn't wait to get home to tell all her friends about me comforting her. And that was the talk of the school the next week, on Monday. Anyway, that's one of my fond memories of the debate.
Now, what other families were in your neighborhood?
Well, there were the Simonsons and the Colvins and Johansons and Wilsons and Corpola. Oh golly, I can't remember all of them now. But we had regular teams and football teams and basketball teams we organized, you know. And we lived right next to the Taylor School.
Uh-huh.
Our house was not more than 100 yards from the school building. And that was a playground then. And workup games of baseball we could play there. You know, it was kind of sloping, but we made do. And on the bluff across the street from our house was a level field where we played football. And of course, sometimes the football came over the bluff and down the hill, we had to chase it. But that was a good place to play football. It was a short field, and we played football. And up in the woods, we'd play all kinds of games, war games, with bean shooters, you know. Until finally somebody brought a rifle on the other team, and that put an end to our war games. That was getting dangerous. Yeah. A BB gun wouldn't have been so bad, but hey, somebody had a .22 rifle and they brought in.
Yeah. Those slingshots can be pretty lethal.
Yeah, that put an end to our war games. They're getting too serious.
Did you ever speak Finnish to the other kids?
I think that's about all we talked.
They
were all Finns.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah, they all learn to speak Finnish before they learn English, like I did. They say I got a Finnish accent. I don't realize it's my own accent, but that's what I learned. I learned English when I went to school. No problem. Didn't have to have multilingual teaching and all that. I think that's a lot of baloney. People come here, they can learn English. We all did. You know, we were first. I was first generation American, born in this country. All my ancestors were born in Finland, and most of the kids I went to school with were the same way. It's a similar situation.
Well, were there Swedish-speaking Finns in your area?
Not very many. I know one family down on Alameda Avenue were Swedish, and I think they learned Finnish. They were, because you know Sweden had control of Finland for over 600 years, and Finland was more or less of a province, it was a province or a duchy. I don't know. Under Russia, I guess it was a duchy. Finland had their own government and everything. And under the Swedes, it was kind of like a province. And the Finns pretty much ruled themselves, except they were, of course, subject to the Swedish church and everything like that. And everybody had to be a Lutheran, baptized, and that was the law. And you couldn't get married unless you'd been baptized and gone to confirmation school and all that kind of stuff. And the Swedes pretty much used Finland as a base of conscripting their armies for their wars in Europe. The Finns constituted a big part of the Swedish armies going into Germany and against Russia. And when Sweden was really in the 1600s and 1700s, they were an aggressive nation. And a lot of Finns, able-bodied Finns, were subject to that conscripting. Of course, they were poor, and I guess that was one way of making a living. But
well, is Seeborg name a Swedish name?
No. You go back to the history, and you know Merle Reinke.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he's a good cousin of mine, and he has done this research. including into the name. And he, in 1985, I think, he published the genealogy, the Reinica family, you know, ancestors and descendants. And my son has now put a revised, up-to-date 2009 edition of that same thing in a beautiful shape, and bigger print and everything. And but anyway, in the introduction of Merle's book, he goes into this, and he comes to the conclusion after his research, including travel in Finland and everything, that the name originated with German soldiers way back in about the 17th century, who were captured by the Swedes, the Swedish army, which had a lot of Finns in it. And because he was suspected of then talking, you know, as a soldier, he was afraid to go back to his native Germany after the war, that he was brought to Finland. And the name Rhine reminds you of Rhinelander from Germany. And Ika means from this place. So that led Merle to come to the conclusion that our name originated in these German soldiers, because his early records go back to 1690 something, that he's able to trace from church records. But then, since then, the government of Finland has put out a name book of Finnish names, and have done more research, and they found the same name Reinica back in the 1200s. So it's just a legend. He presented as a legend to begin with, but then we had in the revised edition now, it said it was just a legend. The Finnish Reinica name actually goes back much more, about 300 or 400 years earlier than what he thought.
What about the Seeborg name?
That's a short story. My grandfather and father came to this country in about 1886 or something like that. I don't remember. And his name was Tolvanen. Tolvanen. And his ancestry comes from Lieksa in eastern Finland, very near the Russian border. But his father was the second or the third son, so he wouldn't inherit any. They were well-to-do farmers, and he would not inherit any of the. So he moved then to western Finland, Haukipudas, which is near Oulu in Finland, and they lived there for. My father was born there, and from there they emigrated to the United States. And when he took out citizenship, you know, you have to forbear allegiance to any foreign country or potentate or anything like that. And he changed his name from Tolvanen to Seeborg. He didn't want any connection at all that might have anything to do with Russia, because Russia at that time was a ruler of Finland. And he swore allegiance to the United States and forswore any allegiance to anybody else, particularly to the Tsar. He made that a point in his application for citizenship. But that's how we got the name Seeborg. Why he picked Seeborg, nobody knows. One of the grandchildren on my dad's side said she had questioned him about, she's probably about 10 years older. She had questioned him about that, and he couldn't remember. But then he said, well, it might have been, I heard some birds singing, and they sounded like they were singing Seeborg.
Sounds like he had a sense of humor.
But anyway, it's an ersatz name. Because normally the Swedish version of that name is SEA, and there are lots of SEA words that go back to the old country.
I had wondered if you were related to the Seeborgs across the river.
No,
With
we
the
are not.
family.
No, we are not related to the Seaborgs across the river. Yeah. Nor are we related to the Glenn Seeborg from the University of California, who was the Nobel laureate in atomic energy. When I went to school down there in '36, he was there getting his graduate degree, Glenn Seeborg. And I didn't know it, except a few years later, when we were, my mother's mother, my mother and mother-in-law lived in Berkeley, and we would go down there frequently to see her with my wife and kids. And I went to Broward on San Pablo Avenue, a big street there in Berkeley, to get my car serviced. And he picked up on it and said, he says, you know Glenn Seeborg up to college? I said, no, but we have a similar name. Oh, he's just a common old guy like you. He brings his old jalopy in here to get serviced. And he became world famous, of course. And he was head of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission when I was working in the Foreign Agricultural Service, and one or two times our mail got mixed up. Either I got some of his mail or he got some of my mail, and we got on the telephone and straightened it out. I never met the man though, but he retired and he served a term there for about 6 years in the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, and then he came back to the University of California. And he was a professor there, and I think at one time he was head of the university, and he retired there, and he died a few years ago. He lived to be about 92. Yeah.
You were a very small boy at the time of the influenza epidemic, but I just wonder if you remember anything about it in 1918. When the flu?
I remember, yes, I do remember some things about the end of the war and the flu epidemic. Because my mother, in trying to increase the family income a little, she rented out a room in our house, big, that we had built out, that we had bought up on Churchill. We didn't build it to order it. And she rented out, and that man came down with the flu. And I remember the ambulance coming in, and he couldn't get up the hill to behind the house, and he had to park on the street in front of the house, and they had to come up with the stretchers and get the man. And he died a day or two later. I very well remember them carrying him out. And then the house being fumigated. Oh, everything was fumigated, sulfur and everything else they could think of, you know. But he was a victim of that flu epidemic. And I remember the soldiers coming back from the war and had suffered with poison gas and like that. Were friends of the family, belonged to the same church, and they didn't want to talk about the war at all. None. That was nothing that it was such an unpleasant experience. That trench warfare, you know. We charge and then we can make 100 yards, and then they charge and drive you back 100 yards, and poison gas using all that. Horrible. It really was even worse than World War II, except Normandy, of course.
Were you aware of when you were young, of the division between the church Finns and the socialist Finns?
Had to be aware. You know Suomi Hall?
Yes.
Do you remember the socialist hall?
I've seen pictures.
It was a big hall, and one wonderful place for putting on operas and everything. The non-church Finns organized that, and about half the Finns were that way. Maybe more. I know in my own family about half of them were that way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and when any kind of a big event had to be held, Suomi Hall wasn't big enough to do it. We had to go to Socialist Hall and rent the hall from them. And when I was in about the third grade, I guess fourth grade, we had school put on an operetta, the Naughty Brownie. And they, after, trying everybody out, they picked me out for the Naughty Brownie to sing the solo part. And that was put on at the Socialist Hall, the big Socialist Hall there.
Uh-huh.
And the main thing for the singer, for the solo singer, could they hear me up in the balconies? And they said they could hear me loud and clear. so I sang at that Socialist Hall. Another thing about the Socialist Hall, my oldest brother Bill, he didn't go to high school. He quit high school in his freshman year. He couldn't wake up in the morning. We couldn't get that guy up. Try to get him up to milk the cows. We had cows. And my mother had to go up and milk the cows. Bill wouldn't, and we couldn't get him up to go to school. So he quit school and got a job driving a truck. And I think one of the first trucks was Seeborg transfer company truck. And part of their things were delivering goods to the canneries and stuff. And on one trip down to the cannery, I think it was in February of that year, he was going down, and it was a narrow plank road, over the net tracks, over the river. Two little girls were coming towards him, and they had to get to the side to the cannery. One of them fell into the river. Bill stopped his truck, took off his high-laced boots, leather boots, that came up to his knees, and dived in after her and saved her. He saved her life. She had already gone down, and we asked him after, why did you take the time to take your boots off? He says, he didn't think they could swim with them on. And he says, I learned in the Boy Scouts, haste makes waste. So he kept his cool about him. And he took him on, I'm sure he didn't lose any time taking him, but she had already gone on there, but he was able to find her and bring her up, and they were able to resuscitate her. She was of a Swedish family on Alameda Street. Yeah. And they were lifelong friends then after that. Of course, we thought that he should have been put up for the Carnegie Medal Award, but nobody could fill out the paperwork. I don't think, it takes a lot. But he was really a hero in our family.
Yeah, I don't think the story was in the Kumtuks about your brother.
I don't know.
Yeah, so it's nice to be able to get that recorded.
Yeah. So I don't know what you have, but I know that's part of my memory. I remember my brother Bill coming up the hill carrying his boots soaking wet, and cold. Yeah, to change clothes. I guess he had parked his truck or taken it someplace, and it's only about 3 blocks down from the cannery up to our house. So I well remember that. I happened to be home at the time when he came from making that rescue.
Can you describe the Socialist Hall, or what do you remember of the Socialist Hall?
I remember it was a big hall. They had an auditorium there that would seat about close to 1,000 people.
Wow.
It had big balconies, had 2 balconies, I think, up on it. And it had a stage that was similar to what you'd have in New York, big enough for they put on operas and stuff there. It had a huge stage. It was really good for entertainment. The only thing in town, of that scope. And I don't remember that much more about it. I remember more about the Finn Hall, where they had meetings and stuff of the Finnish societies, that our family belonged to, and the places they'd have for eats afterwards. They'd always have coffee hands. After every event, you had to have coffee service. You had that in church too. I remember my folks in church going And well, when they got through the morning service, and my dad would get up and say, well, coffee is ready. He was the most popular speaker in the church.
Did your parents ever tell you, not to play with those kids who were socialist kids?
No, they never did. They didn't have to, because we had plenty of kids to play with up there. And the kids that I played with were of a similar persuasion as our family. They were none of them that were belonged to that social. Some of my relatives, but they didn't live up on Churchill, were on the other side, and several of them were in the acting group that put on plays and operettas. One of my aunts, my mother's sister, was one of the leading ones in that. She lived out in the country, up at Quincy, and they would come down for those things. And another cousin, second cousin of mine, she was also in that. Her mother had been a cousin. Her mother had been an older sister of my mother, but they were also that. And I'm not sure, but my grandmother Reinika might have been that way herself, and I can tell you why. I knew her quite well before she died. She died about 1932, and as a little kid, I had to deliver things. My mother was very close to her parents, and we didn't live too far from them. They lived on Alameda Avenue. We were up on Churchill, and mother would make things for them. Cook some stuff and you take this to Grandma. I'd be only about 5, 6 years old. And I would always take him. I knew this sort of when I liked to go there. I liked Grandma. And I'd make my delivery, then I'd sit down and wait for a treat. And Grandma, I was waiting for my treat, and she'd always bring me something good to eat, and then I'd go. And we kept up a good relationship. And when Grandpa died, he was very strict religious. And he knew about the schism in the family. And he gave strict orders to his wife, to Grandma, that she was only to stay with my mother, with that daughter, and not go with the other daughter, Fina. Josephina, who lived out in the country, who was of the other persuasion, and one of the actors in Socialist Hall. Well, when Grandpa died, Grandma came over and says, well, here's the arrangement. I will stay with you, Fanny, for 6 months, then I'm going to Aunt Fina's for 6 months. She made up her own mind. And when I started going with my wife, when I always shared my innermost thoughts with Grandma, because she was a person I could talk to, and she was interested, in our lives. And I told her about this girl that I had just met, and I was kind of serious about it. Bring her over, I want to meet her. And I did. I brought her as soon as I could. I had a car available. Most of the time I was walking, but when I could bring her over, and Grandma was sitting in her rocking chair there by the back door of the house. I can remember yet the scene. And when I brought Laura in there, and I said, well, this is Laura. And she looked her up and down and up and down. So this is she said with a big smile. And then she held out her hands to her, to welcome her. And I know when we had music going on in the house, radio, and it'd be good dancing. Under her skirt, you could see her feet tapping. So, as I said, I'm not sure, but she was about half one and half the other. And she still liked her dad. There's a story that's told about the courtship of Grandpa and Grandma, and it's kind of a cute story, and I guess it's pretty true because I asked Grandma about it, and she just said, well, they make too much of that or something. But anyway, the story goes that Grandma had met Grandpa at a midsummer night celebration, which is a big thing in Finland, where they have bonfires and everything, and until midnight, you know, the sun doesn't go down in that northern part of Finland, and they have a big celebration. And Kestila, the town where Dad